Recently I've been hearing a lot of hype about this, the NYXI Wizard. A 60-quid third-party Switch controller modelled after the infamous GameCube control pad. And a lot of the hype comes from the fact that, well, besides the fact it looks like a GameCube controller, this thing uses Hall effect joysticks, which, well, given how plenty of players' Joy-Con are drifting more than a Mazda RX-7 right now, is a welcome addition. And it's not just one solid controller either, it's actually a pair of Joy-Con you can happily slap onto your Switch in order to take your GameCube-like experience conveniently on the go. But is the NYXI Wizard any good? Well, to find out, I'm going to be taking a closer look at it, checking out its bells and whistles, and seeing what it's like to use with a few games. Hello fellow gamers, and looking past some of its gimmicks, is the NYXI Wizard any good? This isn't NYXI's first rodeo. Since 2021, they've been releasing various different Switch controllers and accessories to cater for differing variety of players. And their latest release, the NYXI Wizard, was clearly made to cater for those who love the GameCube. Now I missed the first release wave of these, so mine came a little later, but 6 weeks after I placed my pre-order in January, it's now in my grubby little hands. So, not to waste any time, inside the box you get the NYXI Wizard itself, well obviously. There's also a USB Type-C charging cable, a multi-language instruction manual, and a couple of round joystick gates. We'll get to those later. The manual caters for 5 European languages, including English of course, and it's nice that they included a USB charging cable in the box as well, so you can charge the Wizard whilst not attached to the Switch. Initially holding the Wizard in my hands, it felt pretty good actually, quite solid and thick. The joysticks move well, the front-facing buttons nicely replicate the layout found on the GameCube controller, and it has an okay weight to it. It's slightly more than a GameCube's, but not that much. But of course, given it's a Switch controller, it does have a few obvious differences, such as that larger second analog stick, the larger D-pad, those 2 turbo buttons at the bottom, the plus and minus buttons, the 2 settings buttons for mapping button presses to the rear triggers, and of course, the 4-button layout on the top that we're all accustomed to today. On the GameCube, that right analog was considerably smaller, and these days we're used to having sticks being the same size, so I can see why they've done this. That larger D-pad is a welcome addition though. It even seems to have quite a low travel on it as well, giving out a reassuring little click with the lightest of presses. The GameCube's was more like a Game Boy Advance one, which was far too small. There are 2 pairs of turbo and settings buttons because this is, in fact, a pair of Joy-Con rather than one solid controller, so there's one each for each half. This of course means that there is an unfortunate limitation where they only apply to their own side. It's not so much of an issue for the turbo function, but you're going to quickly find yourself restricted when it comes to mapping button presses or macros on those rear triggers. You can't map buttons from one side onto the opposite rear trigger. Each half of the controller has a USB Type-C port on the base, so they can be charged without having to connect them to a Switch. This is a nice option to have. But NYXI only included one charging cable, so you're going to need to source a second one to charge them both at once. Lastly, we find the more traditional 4-button shoulder layout on the top here. As this is a Switch controller, we sadly can't expect the ZL and ZR buttons to be analog triggers. If anything, they're more like pressing mouse buttons. But, with all that aside, this looks like it might be a good alternative to getting out that GameCube controller adapter. So without further ado, let's see what this is like to use. And my NYXI Wizard, it couldn't have come at a better time, because it arrived just before Metroid Prime Remastered released on physical cartridge. A GameCube-style controller and a remaster of a GameCube game dropping on my doorstep so close together? That's gotta be a match made in heaven. So you can bet I jumped straight onto Metroid Prime. And using the NYXI Wizard with it? You know, it felt right. It was great experiencing a remastered GameCube game with a remastered GameCube controller. On the whole, it was pretty comfortable and it worked really well. It was close to the experience I had when playing the original game on original hardware. And the Wizard's included perks came in handy too. For example, Metroid Prime uses the same button for firing the arm cannon and for firing charge shots, but the remaster lets you use that big green A button or the ZR button to do either. I used the Wizard's turbo feature on one of those buttons so I could easily mow down hordes of enemies, whilst keeping the other free for charge shots. That bigger D-pad made it easier to switch between visors as well, for when I needed to scan different computer screens to progress. And of course, the Wizard is wireless. I mean, sure, the GameCube controllers did have a decent length on their cords, but there's no chance of tripping anyone up with this. But, I have to say, it wasn't all positive. The original Metroid Prime didn't follow what we consider today to be the normal first-person shooter controller convention, where you move and aim using both the analog sticks. The remastered version gives us that option, but using that with the NYXI Wizard is rather awkward. That right analog stick is quite a stretch. To use it, I had to loosen my grip on the controller, and in doing so, it became all unbalanced and it was quite uncomfortable. I know this controller is replicating the GameCube feel, and it does in many ways, but it would have benefited from either making those grips a little wider, or even just keeping that right analog smaller like on the original. I also experimented with mapping a button onto one of the rear triggers, but I quickly found that their placement, well, it wasn't exactly brilliant. They were simply too far in on the handles. Whilst holding the controller naturally, my fingers go right over the rear triggers, where they sat right underneath my finger joints. That doesn't make them very easy to press. I mean, they press in okay when I do use them, but they would have been better off further tucked into the grips of the controller, where the tips of the fingers can easily press them. This, of course, might just depend on the game that you're playing, and besides its flaws, I did have a lot of fun using the NYXI Wizard with Metroid Prime Remastered. It was a great pairing. It made sense to move on to Smash Ultimate next, since wherever possible I play Smash games with a GameCube controller. Whenever I use any other kind of controller, my muscle memory, it just goes completely to pot. That's my excuse and I'm sticking to it. And I gotta say, the Wizard worked well here too. It felt right using this controller with Smash. The main buttons were all in the right place, and those octagonal gates made it really easy for me to be more accurate with my input. Now of course, one of the features of the Wizard is being able to change those gates for circular ones. They're a pain in the ass to remove mine, and honestly I thought I was going to break them my first time round. But after the first attempt, it becomes easier to do. It also gives you the opportunity to take a good look at those Hall effect joysticks as well. You see, the reason why these are so highly spoken of is because, theoretically, these will never drift. They use magnetic fields to measure your movement rather than electrical resistance when two components are touching. There's no contact going on in there, so there's nothing to wear down, and ergo, no drift. And it's this which, along with catering to those who love playing the GameCube, makes a lot of people excited to get a hold of one of these. You could absolutely thrash multiple rounds of Smash every day for the rest of your life and still not get stick drift on this thing. Its potential longevity is a huge selling point. However, what I don't think is a huge selling point for it is the way the gate changing has been implemented. I can see these pieces breaking very easily if you change them around a lot, and it seems that NYXI aren't selling replacements. The NYXI Wizard also lacks NFC support, so you can't scan your amiibo into Smash with this to train them up. You're going to have to keep at least one official Joy-Con to one side at all times in order to do that. Now, just like regular Joy-Con, you can just take these and just click them straight onto your Switch. And my god, this thing is cursed. I mean, sure, your Switch now dwarfs a Steam Deck and it looks like a modern recreation of the GameCube keyboard controller, but it works just the same as before. It feels the same too, and the added weight of the Switch doesn't seem to impede it. Even the Wizard's gyro works well in this playstyle too. It certainly does seem excessive though, especially when you're playing other games that don't have any kind of, GameCube connection to it. You could always opt to use them separately like regular Joy-Con instead, but I can't seem to get a good grip on them this way. It just feels weird if you ask me. Regardless of however you use it though, the rumble on the NYXI Wizard is effective. The strength of the rumble can be changed for either side, but to be honest, its default of 70% should be fine for most. So, the NYXI Wizard is a Switch controller that, when attached together, brings with it a very close approximation of the GameCube experience. It is nice that they gave us function buttons, macro and turbo features on this, but many other controllers have these features without you having to relearn where all the main buttons have moved to. If that's all you're interested in, then I don't think this is the controller for you. No, its main appeal is that GameCube controller shape and of course those Hall effect joysticks, so you don't need to worry about stick drift ever again. It caters more to those of you who've thoroughly enjoyed playing competitively during the GameCube era and want to continue using a GameCube controller when playing today, and especially on game series that existed back then. Now, 60 quid may sound quite steep for a third-party controller, but given how a GameCube controller adapter and GameCube controller together would cost a lot more than this, the NYXI Wizard starts looking rather more financially viable. In summary, it does have its shortcomings, but the NYXI Wizard does succeed in what it set out to do, being a feature-packed and generally all-round good choice of GameCube-style controller for the Switch. But with that, I'm going to head off, so thanks very much for watching. What are your thoughts on the NYXI Wizard? Do you have one? What have your experiences been like with it? Let everyone know down below in the comments. And hey, while you're down there, a like is always appreciated if you enjoyed the video, and there's always that subscribe button if you want to hear more from me. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you all next time.